of critique of sorry. Okay. Hi everyone, and welcome to the first session of Critique of Pure Plasticity, the Thermo-Informatic Transduction of Kant by our instructor Joel White. In Hans Vaihinger neo-Kantian masterpiece, The Philosophy as If, he argues that the unjustified transference to the world of the Kantian categories lead to all those philosophical important ideas, such as world substance, cosmic energy, cosmic causes. For Vaihinger, these ideas are mere logical illusions that partake of Dinge and sich, noumenal things as such. However, in true Kantian style, Vaihinger also argues that these illusions remain necessary for a subjective and conceptual standpoint. Even beyond, I will argue that regulative ideas such as these are necessary precisely because they offer unity to a class of categories that provide structure for any investigation into the condition of existence of things. Following Vaihinger, I posit that there are four Dinge and sich that guide us back from the absolute to a class of transcendental categories that function as the conditions of possibility of existence. The idea of conservation of energy, cosmic energy, the idea of heat death, cosmic entropy, the idea of pure communication, cosmic information, the idea of absolute certainty, cosmic information, entropy. Each regulative idea has its corresponding class of categories: energy, entropy, information, and information entropy, which I call entropy. Each class of category likewise follows the Kantian table of categories insofar as energy is quantitative in Kant, information is relational, thermodynamics entropy is qualitative, and informatic entropy is modal. It is not enough, however, to just state each class of categories and name their corresponding relationship to the Kantian categories of pure understanding. As Kant argues in the deduction, it must nonetheless be demonstrated that the four concepts of existence are the necessary and universal conditions for existence. Each transduction of a concept of the Thermo-Informatic table of categories requires the deduction of the concept as it appears in the scientific domain, being carried over its complementary category. How does it relate to the condition of possibility of the object of experience, which at the same time the conditions of possibility of the object of existence? If, as Catherine Malbou argues, plasticity denotates both the capacity to take information, as in the plasticity of clay, and to give form, as in the plastic arts and plastic surgery, then what is being sought here is precisely the conditions of pure plasticity qua possible existence, since existence always presents itself to the understanding as form and as its possible information. What are the conditions of possibility of plasticity in general? This seminar will outline a draft of the transducted Thermo-Informatic table of categories. We will read from Kant's Transcendental doctrine of elements and the Transcendental logic and the Transcendental analytic, as well as from the history of thermodynamics and information theory in order to provide a critique of pure plasticity. Joel White is a research affiliate of the Research Network of Philosophy of Technology and executive editor of Technofanti, the network's academic journal, Rabon University Press. His research is situated in the emerging transdisciplinary field of continental philosophy of media, science, and technology, currently focusing on how 19th century thermodynamics was received into philosophy and literature, and how scientific concepts, including energy, entropy, and information, have become philosophical concepts. He has published articles and books, chapters related to this research, including on the notions of signification, energy and education in educational philosophy and theory, art and entropy in aesthetic literacy, entropy informed in plea, Warwick Journal of Philosophy, Kant, Digital Immortality in the Aesthetics and Phenomenology, Information Overloading, and the Internet in Parallax, and has a book chapter on life's entropic indeterminacy, incontingency, and plasticity in everyday technologies. Roman and Littlefeld, edited by Natasha Lucentich, Ian Campbell, and Dominic Smith. He is also a published translator of the French 20th century avant-garde, having published a book-length of Anthony Artaud's revolutionary message, Bloomsbury, an active cinematographic and colorist. His film's collaboration with artist Madison Boykoff have also been nominated and shown at the Villa Medici Film Festival and Anne Arbor Film Festival. Thank you, Matt. The floor is yours. You're muted, Matt. Sorry.
Thanks, Frida. I was muted. Yeah. So very. I should probably shorten that bio at some point. It's very long. And listening to the description of the course, some things maybe have changed to a certain extent, as thought does change as you go about writing. So what I will do now is kind of present what is in essence a kind of an introduction to the leading question that kind of drives what I call the critique of pure plasticity. I'm hoping that this introduction will clarify the question, will also hopefully be a good introduction to kind of critical philosophy as it is understood in Kant, and what searching for the conditions of possibility of something might mean, and whether we can take analogically the question that pertains to experience in the first critique and say apply that to the notion of plasticity. So what I will do is I'll give this presentation, which is about 20 slides long, to talk through it as I kind of go along, and then we'll kind of talk a little bit more about the course and some other practical things. For those that maybe took my course, the Introduction to Thermodynamics, I see there are maybe some of you who are here last year. You'll be in a very good place for this course. I've decided to do it a bit differently. Last time, the Introduction to Thermodynamics was really kind of functioned like that. It was a kind of an introduction to the main concepts within thermodynamics, the main ideas and problems, philosophical problems that arise out of that. Whereas this time, it's really my project, a project that I've been kind of working on for quite some time, but haven't really got down to really writing it yet. So this is the writing of that, of what I call the critique of pure plasticity. So very, very much open to anyone seeing any problems within it, any logical problems or anything of that sort. Okay, so I will share my screen because I will be sharing not the word, but the, have I called it anything yet? No, presentation 1. Okay. So, could you just say whether you can see that?
Yes, we can.
Brilliant, thank you. Okay, so this is the bit when I kind of lose any feedback of my own face, so I can see just the presentation itself. So, if anything is going on in the room, be aware that I'm unaware of that. So, please just butt in if something, if you need to say something or ask a question. I will go kind of quite slowly through this. As I said, it's a written text, it's a written presentation, but that writing is in the PowerPoint, and I kind of like to kind of talk off from things and go slowly through things as I read. We've got plenty of time kind of to go through this. So a critique of pure plasticity, right? So Seminar 1, Introduction to the question. So I was going to kind of go right into the heart of things and present on the notion of energy as a quantitative category. But I won't be doing that. I thought that would maybe be a bit kind of unfair, maybe to go straight into that. So what I will do is present something that is comparable to the introduction to the first critique, as kind of Kant outlines it either in the A or the B edition, and try and formulate the question scholastically, in a certain sense, as the way that Kant puts it in the Prolegomena. So today's reading was supposed to be kind of the first part of the transcendental logic. What we won't be doing also in the course is I won't be doing a transduction of the transcendental aesthetic, and I won't be giving either an outline to the second part of transcendental logic, which is the dialectic. Nor will I be expanding into the last third part in Kant's first book, which is the method. So, because it would just take too long, and that would be a presentation of a whole of the whole critique. I have written on a kind of on the dialectic, or one problem of the dialectic already, which was mentioned actually by Frida, and that was an essay or an article on the notion of digital immortality. So one of the reasons behind turning to a critique of pure plasticity, or turning to critical philosophy and what critical philosophy may provide us as a structure, or as an architectonic structure with which to think something, is the return to a certain extent of what can we call dialectical illusions. So certain illusions that might surpass the possibility of experience, as Kant might put it, or the possibility of plasticity, as we might now try and put it. Within those kind of illusions, one can see a kind of analog to the Kantian dialectic, which is to say immortality. So within transhumanism, there has been a kind of return of what might be considered to be the possibility of a form of immortality. The article that I wrote there was to show that there are certain paralogisms when one takes when one tries to assert of immortality some form of possible experience. And if anyone wants to see where I'm kind of going with that, there's that article. So that kind of gives an indication of to a certain extent why there is a necessity for something like a critique of pure plasticity, and hopefully those, and I will talk about those illusions as we kind of go along, and how they align to particular transcendental ideas. So the beginning of next session, I will kind of actually outline the whole of that critique, so you can see, as Kant writes in the Prolegomena, all of the organic parts and how all of those organic parts function together to provide such a critique. However, we will be concentrating on the first part of the transcendental logic, which is the part in which prior to which we get to the dialectic, so the analytic, and I will be providing a kind of a type of transcendental logic for plasticity itself. Okay, what might that mean? So, and you'll notice as I talk that I've this notion of the conditions of the possibility of existence that was in the course outline has kind of disappeared a bit. I was been worried about that sentence for quite some time, so at the moment it doesn't appear anywhere. Okay, so it might seem patent obvious, I suppose, for anyone that's come across the notion of plasticity, that the object of this seminar's critique, or the object of the critique, is plasticity, right? Which we can define descriptively as the irreversible capacity to give and receive form, as well as to deform, and that is therefore to transform. Transformation is the kind of the concept, if you will, under which I subsume the notions of receiving, giving, deforming form. So it might also seem patent that the critique is perhaps the shape of the concept as it finds itself employed in the work of Catherine Malherbe. Indeed, one might even assume that the following seminar seeks to oppose or refute plasticity. But these are both far from being the case. So, to offer a critique of something, and it's probably quite important, that you're on the stream critical philosophy, right? To truly understand what it might mean to offer a critique of something. In Kantian fashion is never purely a negative pursuit. Critique, or transcendental philosophy, asks both the positive question, what are the conditions of possibility of X? And through asking such a question, determine the origin, scope, and the objective validity of X. As well as the negative question, given these conditions, what are the limits of X, beyond which no judgment pertaining to it is then possible. So while the object of the forthcoming critique is therefore plasticity, it is more strictly, as per Kant's first critique, the critique of pure reason, a critique of pure plasticity. It seeks therefore to ask, and this is maybe the scholastic question, as Kant says in the Prolegomena, what are the conditions of possibility of plasticity? And given these conditions, what are the limits of plasticity, beyond which no judgment pertaining to it is then possible? Or, what are the conditions of possibility of transformation? And given these conditions, what are the limits of transformation, beyond which no judgment pertaining to it is then possible? So that's the positive and negative question, if you will, of the critique. It's not criticism as such. It's to a certain extent to pass judgment on it, in the sense where we get the notion of critique from, right? Crisis, also from Greek, but it's really to ask this kind of double-sided positive negative question. So, firstly, purity is not a predicate like any other. It's a very strange predicate. That which is pure, right? So if we could say that whether it's an analytic or synthetic predicate is also something quite interesting to ask. But that which is pure is that which is fully itself. Thus, plasticity purified of all that is not plastic, if we were to try and think what pure plasticity is. In a certain sense, this functions well as a working description, as a working descriptive definition of pure plasticity. Plasticity that is unconditioned by anything else, that is singularly and perfectly, to use those predicates of Platonic formness, plastic, right? So that which is plasticity that is only plastic, right? That is unconditioned by anything else, unbound, absolute. So these terms that we get, let us say unbound, unconditioned, absolute, they find their position more aptly in the dialectic, right? In a dialectic, in particularly in Kant's dialectic. And I haven't got this in here, but it's important that what we understand by dialectic is as Kant defines it, and it's not therefore necessarily what it comes to, or what it means in Plato, or even what it comes to mean, say, in Hegel or Marx or other dialectical thinkers. So the Kant, that which is dialectical is that which is, to a certain extent, illusionary, right? That which has the pretense, if you will, to surpass certain limits, or that which we claim doesn't, or we can claim that is in experience, but nonetheless, actually, when we look at its conditions, see that it isn't possible from the standpoint of experience, and thus is illusionary. So this idea that of pure plasticity that is unconditioned by anything else, right? That is purely plastic, right? Perfectly plastic. Not quite a circular definition, though very nearly, right? It merely states that if plasticity is to be plastic, right, then surely it must be nothing but plastic. So if red, for example, was said to be pure red, it is understood to be a color that contains nothing but red, so unmixed with any other substance or accident, any other color. So pure red contains no green, no blue. Pure red is thus red. We can maybe argue about that from a scientific point of view, but I won't go into that right at the moment. So the same can be said of water. Pure water is water, right? It's H2O that contains no other molecule than H2O. In Kant's critiques, purity signifies more or less the same thing, right? That he says that it is unmingled with anything that is not itself. So pure reason is reason alone. It is nothing but reason. And by the end of the analytic, we shall see that what also Kant adds in is a very interesting table of categories called the table of nothing, and hopefully we'll get to that by the time we get to the end of the course. So this nothing is actually quite important, right? The importance of this nothing. So if one were to purify reason, right, of all that was not reason, one would first need to identify that which finds itself mixed up, mingled up with it, and remove it. Much like if one wanted pure water, right, one would need to strip, as they say in brewing. So when you brew beer, often what a brewer will do is strip water of all of its impurities or everything that's inside it, and then build maybe a water profile by adding stuff back into it. But to strip, right, water, all those impurities means to remove everything that is dissolved into it, right? Salts, minerals, and other molecules. So what then is purified reason? Reason is, or pure reason is pure thought alone. But it is also understood as the capacity for thought. So understood is by Kant as also the capacity to judge. So judgment untainted by all that is not thought. So a judgment within which there is only, one might say, reason. That would be judgment of pure reason. So it is thought, one could say thinking thought, or reasoning without something. And here is the key term. So it's reasoning without the salt of experience, to use that metaphor from the dissolved other salts in water. So pure reason, negatively defined, is thus the capacity to judge in the absence of experience. Right? So thus, any knowledge, this is Kant, is entitled pure if it is not mixed with anything extraneous. But knowledge is more particularly to be called absolutely pure if no experience or sensation whatsoever be mingled with it, and if it be therefore possible completely a priori. So we're kind of starting to build up also here an understanding of what Kant is trying to do. So pure reason is reason without experience, quite simply put. Right? But how is this form of judgment at all possible? Surely judgment, right, requires some object, some act, or something in general on which it passes judgment. What then is pure reason judging, if this cannot, by definition, be experience? How is judgment without experience possible? So with this last question, right, so how is judgment without experience possible? We find ourselves in liminal proximity to the leading question in the first critique, which is, quite simply, how are a priori synthetic judgments possible? Which is what I remember first reading the first critique, incredibly cryptic. Right? What does a priori mean? What is synthetic? What are judgments? Right? Possible. We know what that means, right? How is something or some form of judgment possible? Still, judgment is something that is still in a certain sense needs to be clarified. Well, what is judgment? Right? So, to ask how an a priori judgment is possible, right, is the same as asking how judgment without experience or perhaps more precisely, before experience, right, is possible. So, we will return to this question of the temporality of this before. So, although the transcendental logic, or transcendental logic in and of itself, offers you that which is a priori necessary and universal from the standpoint of the condition of possibility of experience, right? So that which is a priori, the before there, and this is not just my particular reading of the first critique, is not necessarily understood to be kind of chronologically prior to experience. Right? But what I take it to mean, and I think it is more accurately it could be understood as, is signifying precisely the condition in the absence of experience. So, what are the conditions of experience in the absence of experience, right? So, now I will come to this later. Okay, so we also must be careful not to simply declare that critical philosophy, because it asks how judgments without experience, right, judgments of pure thought, as Kant writes, are possible, that it constitutes a pure idealism or a pure rationalism, right? This might seem as what it's kind of getting at, right? If it's trying to say there are a certain set, or a certain, we could use the term set, but there's a certain mode of judging, right? That is a priori, conditions experience before experience, right? Or in the absence of experience. It would seem, and trying to say how that is possible, it would seem as though we are trying to think of a kind of idealism, which is to say, precisely not an empiricism, right? A judgment that is only of reason, right? Rationalist, only of reason. But this isn't quite the case, right? So, critical philosophy, which also takes the name transcendental idealism, right, or critical idealism, as Kant names it in the very, very end of the preface to the Prolegomena, which I am a fan of, and I think I've put it into the part of the reading list, in particular the second part of the Prolegomena, because that deals more specifically with principles of natural sciences, or as Kant calls it in the Prolegomena, the physiological principles. The Prolegomena, in a certain sense, is a response to those who read the critique in Kant's day and claimed past judgment on Kant to say that he was just an idealist or just a rationalist, so that he hadn't really performed any critique. So it's a good source for seeing that. So, although this critical idealism, right, which we might say then, if it's critical, right, it's searching for the conditions of the possibility of idealism, right. Although it's a form of idealism, it by no account denies experience, right. Experience is even understood by Kant as what he calls the touchstone, right, the touchstone of the first critique. So, and indeed, and even in the B edition, right, Kant supplied an entire refutation to this, right, that it's simply just an idealism. And that was to say, to kind of respond to those who thought that his transcendental idealism was just something like an idealism like Berkeley's. So what must be considered is therefore how, through outlining the conditions of the possibility of the objects of experience, right, which is to say the question of how synthetic a priori judgments are possible, is also answered. So the conditions of the possibility of experience itself, but also the condition of the possibility of the objects of experience, right? So what are the conditions of those of experience itself, and also those objects which find themselves in experience, and how that relates to the question, how are synthetic a priori judgments possible, right? So by thinking those two together, we come to a kind of an answer, in a certain sense, we get the outline of the first critique. So reversing this question, we might also want to ask whether synthetic a priori judgments are at the same time the conditions of the possibility of experience, which is in a certain sense to say that experience is formed, right? It's formed, or as Kant says, brought into existence through synthetic a priori judgments. And I was saying earlier about how I was kind of worrying about this the conditions, the possibility of existence question, and I think one of the reasons why I was worried about putting that in and kind of is we, to a certain extent, and this is the kind of the Heideggerian line of reading or interpretation of the first critique, is that are we talking about an ontology, right? In which I suppose would be about being more than it would be about existence, but are we talking about an ontology of the conditions of existence? So, and which is to a certain extent not too far away from the way that Heidegger, in his book on Kant, in the Kant book, tries to see this distinction between the analytic and the dialectic. So in that, his argument is that if we look to those philosophers which are prior to Kant, Wolff, or we look to Baumgarten, or even if we look to the scholastic period prior to Kant, we see this division between what he calls what is called metaphysica generalis and metaphysica specialis. And metaphysica generalis was to a certain extent understood as an ontology, right? And the specialis was the inquiry into psychology, cosmology, and theology, which does very well align to the ideas, the transcendental ideas that find themselves in the dialectic. But I don't want to kind of place Heidegger's reading, or kind of surreptitiously place Heidegger's reading into mine. But there is this very interesting phrase here where Kant says that synthetic a priori judgments are that which bring experience into existence. And of course, we have the question of Wirklichkeit and Dasein, even actually in Kant's category. So we do have the notion, right, of existence, actuality there in it, but being maybe not. Anyway, this is me going off on mine. So why specifically are synthetic a priori judgments, or how could it be possible that synthetic a priori judgments might be understood as the conditions of the possibility of experience, right? Those forms of judgment that bring experience into existence. So, what is a judgment? So we can start understanding some of this terminology. And there's some of the best work, I think, on Kant has questioned what judgment is, and of course we have the third critique, which brings judgment itself maybe more singularly under critique. But some of the best work is on this notion of what is this capacity, this power of judgment, right? There's a brilliant book by Howard Kegel, who the person that taught me Kant, called The Art of Judgment, and it really is an amazing book. So if anyone really wants to go on a deep dive into the notion of judgment, I would recommend that. So in Kant's critical philosophy, right, a judgment, Urteil, right, is a kind of cognition, erkenntnis, kind of knowledge almost. Right? Its specific power, Urteilskraft, right, Kraft, power, as Kant writes both in the third critique and in his lectures on logic. And I would, for those who really do also again want to do a deep dive into Kant, the logic. I mean, Kant taught logic for a lot of his life. His lectures on logic are very good for trying to get to the bottom of some forms of definitions, some descriptive definitions of some of these terms that Kant uses. So judgment, right, involves comparing a subject, a thing, with a predicate, a mark or attribute, right? Typically expressed by the copula is. So what we what we might now call a judgment is a proposition. Right? So we have a subject, we have a predicate. That subject and predicate is conjoined through the copula is. So I won't go into the kind of analytic problem here, or even the problem between analytic and synthetic judgments that is then picked up, obviously, in analytic philosophy. But it must be said that the is can take on different forms, right? Now, if anyone wants to go into that, the is isn't always obviously predicative. But anyway, in this form of judgment, right, judgment involves comparing a subject, thing, with the predicate. It involves investigating, if you will, the relationship between thing, a subject, and a predicate, mark, or an attribute of that thing, of that subject. So this comparison, as was one of Kant's great discoveries, or we could say distinctions, so this comparison, this form of judgment can either be, according to Kant, analytic, where the predicate is already contained in the concept of the subject, such as all bodies are extended, or synthetic, where the predicate adds something, right, extends our knowledge, which is not already given in the concept. Right? The body is red. This is an a posteriori synthetic judgment. So if I say have a concept of a body, right, which is extension in space and time, and I have the concept of the color red, right, and I can see that this body is red, right, I'm making an empirical judgment about that thing, right, which can be then that judgment can then be we can use the principle of non-contradiction to see whether that is correct or not, as Kant says. So just as kind of an interesting it's an interesting anecdote. I was using so this is to kind of show the maybe the as Dreyfus would say, what computers still don't know. To talk about AI, I asked ChatGPT. This is probably everyone has anecdotes about this. I asked ChatGPT a very simple question: is the proposition, or is the judgment all bodies are extended, an analytic or synthetic judgment? And it came back and said, this is this is not a analytics judgment. This is a synthetic judgment, because extended is not contained in the concept of body, which is rather amusing, considering that it is like the most. We can try and maybe critique that, and I'm sure there's many people in analytic philosophy that could talk about this and whether extension is in the body itself, but. This is very, very, very clear in Kant, where he just says this is an analytic judgment. So it's the other one, very famous one, is all bachelors are unmarried men. That way around, right? Not all unmarried men are bachelors, because obviously we have widows and that sort. But and children are unmarried. Would they be bachelors? Anyway, this is nonetheless one of the famous analytic judgments, right? All bodies are extended, and the reason why that is that within the notion of body, right, there is necessarily the idea of extension. Right? So to think of a body, we can use the principle of non-contradiction there, which is to say that if a body is non-extended in space and time, is it a body at all? Right? That would be the question to that. Or another way we might ask this, and this would touch on what I would call the aesthetic of pure plasticity. Is it that experience, right, shows us, or to a certain extent, that bodies are, right, or extended? Is it logically possible, to put this other way, is it logically possible that some bodies are not extended? Right? It seems illogical. However, here we start to get into the kind of maybe into the realm of something like a cloud of probability, or a cloud of probability in quantum mechanics, and what the notion of a field may be, or it's a body within a field. But that's for another time, or for the beginning of the book. So, okay. So one of the most critical functions of a judgment is therefore what is called the subsumption of a particular under a universal. So subsumption just kind of means that we can say of something that it partakes of a category, right? So to use an empirical example, this is a table, right? And this particular table partakes of table as a concept, and therefore is subsumed under that concept. To use a priori, non-experiential, non-empirical concept, we might say something like a unit of quantity, 1 unit of quantity, or a unit in of itself can be subsumed under the category of quantity itself. Plurality maybe could be subsumed under the concept of quantity. And next week, when we kind of outline the table of the categories, we'll see that as kind of more evident in a certain sense. Okay. So one of the critical functions of judgments is to subsume, right? The joy of teaching at home is that you can, I can still smoke. But anyway, one of the most, okay. So as you might have noticed, right, the subtitle of the course, the Thermo-Informatic, Transduction of the categories, as you might have noticed, right, this coming, will not be concerned, right, and I spoke about this a little bit, with the aesthetic or the pure forms of intuition. This is for no other reason than the fact that if we were to draft through transduction, which is my method, maybe I'll talk about that in a bit, but a transcendental aesthetic, right, in light of the advancements in the natural sciences, we would require a lot more than 4 weeks. 1 second, I just need to give my dog some water. I'll be back in 2 seconds. Okay, sorry about that. That's the problem with working at home. Okay, so it would take a lot longer than 4 weeks. It suffices to say that, according to Kant, right, the aesthetic is that which concerns itself with what he calls intuitions. So the faculty of sensibility, of sense, provides the sense data, right, the given, which is then to be subsumed under the pure concept. So here we're kind of getting also to getting close to what might be a synthetic, right, a synthesis or a union, something that is added to, right. So for Kant, this sense data, right, and it's also important to say that intuition, right, for Kant doesn't mean, although it may be related to, doesn't mean this notion of kind of having prévoyance, a kind of intuition about something, right? Although it's connected, it means really this capacity for the reception of sense data as formed through space and time, as the conditions, the transcendental conditions, forms that are within the intuition as a completely separate faculty. And this kind of separation actually between the sensibility or intuitions and understanding, where there are the concepts, although many people have kind of tried to, there is a tension still within Kant whether we can truly separate these two things. Where was I going with this? Oh, that's right. Nonetheless, gives us some indication about this notion of where this purity comes in. So, if we're looking at the understanding on its own, right, it's just understanding, we must be looking at which Kant is doing in the transcendental logic, not in the aesthetic, right? It's just looking at the understanding, which is wherein capacity to judge or to think occurs, right? Where the concepts are, right? Those concepts have to be pure of or separate from sense. Right? And so the synthesis, if you will, this synthetic a priori comes in here through this. You can see this subsumption, if you will, of the forms, space and time, under the concepts, which are the categories, right, that he deduces. So we're starting to get an understanding of what this synthesis might mean, right, in here. The other thing that maybe I would like to say at this point is it's kind of a bit of a tension that I was thinking about this week as I was writing this, is that for Kant, the sense data that is received, right, so that's received through intuitions in sensibility is something which he calls the material of experience. He calls it the material of experience, right? We also have this notion of data here, the given, right, that which is given to. I think personally that Kant, in a certain sense, slips up here, where he says, he intimates that this sense data is in of itself empirical, right, of experience. Now, if experience, as we've seen earlier, is brought into existence, it's brought into existence, right, and therefore experience in and of itself, right, is not the a priori condition of experience, which we'll go into in a second. But if we think about underneath experience, there is this synthetic relation between sense data and pure concepts. If sense data, to a certain extent, is a condition of the possibility of experience, it cannot in and of itself be empirical, because it is a condition of it. Kant argues that it is, to a certain extent, and only the form, space, and time are a priori, right? But hopefully you can see to a certain extent where I'm going with this is that if that which is received, if we have no real access to that sense data, and if it underlies experience, then it cannot be in and of itself empirical. But it's another tension that maybe someone would like to explore. Okay, so if I were to provide a transcendental aesthetic for a critique of pure plasticity, the notion of a field, whether that be of space-time, right, the field of space-time and general relativity, or quantum field theory as we have it, right, for fundamental subatomic particles, must be interrogated. Since Kant, right, the very form of space-time in general relativity is quite different, very different from the Euclidean geometry, right, that formed the basis for Newtonian mechanics, or that formed the basis for Kant's own thinking through the notion of space and time, right? If we were to provide an aesthetic, we would have to think about this notion of a field and the relationship that a field has to a particle, to a body. And in that sense, we would have to interrogate the duality that we find in quantum mechanics between waves and particles. I won't do that here. Okay, so save this for another time. For the moment, however, it is enough to say that the sensibility, no matter its pure forms, supplies the understanding, right? Look at this verb, supplies the understanding with sense data that is not the thing in itself, right? Not the thing in itself, but with an already preformed material, right? And for those who are aware of Simondon here, right? Simondon brilliantly in the introduction to his own book on individuation talks about this, this master's gaze. When we think about hylomorphism, right, the coming together of form and matter, that matter is assumed to be homogeneous by the gaze, he says, of the master. That's a wonderful part, right? The worker himself would have no doubt that matter itself is not homogeneous, right? It has to be, to a certain extent, preformed. So, since this subsumption, right, this type of judgment, subsumption, right, sense data under the pure categories is the condition of empirical judgments, Kant argues that a transcendental doctrine of judgment is therefore necessary. Why? Okay? So this doctrine in Kant seeks to explain how such a subsumption, right, such a subsumption of sense data, forms that sense data is formed under or preformed under, and then the pure categories is possible. How this, as I can see in here, right, this synthetic, right, it's adding something to something. Right? There's nothing within sense data itself, right, that is categorial. Right, there's nothing in the categories that is of sense. Right, so we can't analytically find one or the other in it. Right? They must be added together. Right? And there must be a priori, because, as Kant says, they are the condition of possibility of experience. Right? So hopefully you can start to see where we're going. So again, this doctrine, right, the transcendental logic, seeks to explain how such a subsumption is possible. How such a subsumption is possible, thereby accounting for the a priori absence of experience, conditions of the possibility of experience. I promise we'll get to plasticity. So it is important to note that Kant was not asking whether experience is at all possible. Right? So experience alone demonstrates that it is possible. Right? What need would there be of Kant's first critique if the question were simply, are synthetic priori judgments possible? And Adorno in his work on Kant picks this up as well, right? The importance of this, of reframing the question as how, not why are they possible, right? Not are they possible, not even really what are they, right? What are they would be, there is that, I suppose, but it's really how, right? So to ask how synthetic a priori judgments are possible is, I argue, to ask quite specifically what the conditions of the possibility of experience are. One cannot therefore presuppose that the answer comes from experience itself. Right? Experience cannot condition itself. For as Kant writes in the introduction to the B edition, right, for whence could experience derive its certainty, if all the rules according to which it proceeds were always themselves empirical? Or otherwise put, they, experiences, so funny, must be in a position to show a certificate of birth quite other than that of descent from experiences. Kant thus distinguishes transcendental knowledge from kind of just an a priori knowledge. Transcendental refers specifically to knowledge that explains how representations, so intuitions or concepts, are possible or employable a priori. So this is the task of transcendental logic, which investigates the a priori laws of the understanding as they relate to sense data. So, indeed, Kant's critique of pure reason could quite as easily have been entitled a critique of pure experience. That is, if it were to have stopped short at the analytic, not continued to offer a critique of dialectical illusion. So remember here, dialectics is this kind of illusion whereby one says of experience something that is impossible for experience. So for Kant is as critical, right? This is important, right? Critical thinking of it here, right? What are the conditions of possibility of Lockean and Humean empiricism as he is of Wolffian rationalism. Thus, the only deduction that can be given of this knowledge, right? Knowledge of the conditions of experience in a priori synthetic judgments is one that is transcendental, not empirical. In respect to pure, In respect to pure a priori concepts, the latter type of deduction is an utterly senseless enterprise, which can be engaged in only by those who have failed to grasp the quite peculiar nature of these modes of knowledge. What Locke and Hume failed to grasp was that a pure mathematics and a pure science of nature were both possible a priori. And this is where Kant sees this intuition. There's me using the wrong type of This is where Kant sees this problem, right? Why it's neither a rationalism or empiricism, precisely transcendental philosophy. So, or more, he sees that there are judgments pertaining to both pure mathematics and pure science that are synthetic a priori judgments. He writes, if Hume had envisioned our problem in all its universality, he would never have been guilty of this statement that causality is a question of habit, right? So destructive of all pure philosophy. Where he would then have recognized that, according to his own argument, pure mathematics, as certainly containing a priori synthetic propositions, judgments, would not also be possible. From such an assertion, his good sense would have been would have saved him. So here is worth turning to Kant's famous example from arithmetic. So he writes, we might indeed at first suppose that the proposition 7 plus 5 equals 12 is a merely analytic proposition and follows by the principle of contradiction from the concept of the sum of 7 and 5. But if we look more closely, we find that the concept of the sum of 7 and 5 contains nothing save the union of the two numbers into one. He continues. The concept of 12 is by no means already thought in merely thinking this union of 7 and 5. And I might analyze my concept of such a possible sum as long as I please, still I shall never find the 12 in it. So what does he mean by this? So arithmetic of this form is said to be synthetic a priori because it is only through the synthetic union of the numbers 7 and 5, in addition to the concept of addition, that one may arrive at 12. So there's nothing analytic, right, or contained in the representation, the concept of 12, that attributes it to 7 and 5. So we're given extra information. We're given information about the sum that is said to make 12 in this instance. And we could think of many other forms of sums that might give us 12. So, furthermore, the quanta of arithmetic, right? The quanta, right? That is to say, numbers, right, are not objects derived from pure experience. This is what in mathematics one calls an intuitionist notion of mathematics. But as Kant argues, pure intuition, right? So, where is 12 outside of thought, one might ask, right? So, what must always adjoin the unit to the number likewise makes this painting, right? I don't know whether when you were when I was at school, often the teachers would say, well, 12 what, right? 12 monkeys, right? Is this kind of chiding way of trying, always getting you to add to the number some form of sense, right? Some sort of sensibility, right? But again, this is not. We won't go into the philosophy of mathematics. We'll have Matt for that. So the same is also true of, he says, of pure sciences, of the pure physical sciences, right? And Kant makes this clearer in the Prolegomena, and especially in the metaphysical foundations to the natural sciences. But he writes as he writes in the introduction to the first critique, he says, we only have to consider the various propositions or judgments that are to be found at the beginning of empirical physics, which is physics, right, properly so called. Those, for instance, relating to the permanence in the quantity of matter, to inertia, to the quality of action and reaction, in order to be soon convinced that they constitute a physica pura. So we've got here two examples of synthetic a priori judgments. One is the sum, the mathematical sum, and the other one is this one from what he calls pure physics, physica pura. So one of Kant's prominent examples, right, you see there is the permanence of substance, and by extension, the permanence in the quantity of matter, as he says. So this is his argument. There is nothing in experience itself that determines that such a permanence in quantity is inherent to matter itself. Not only could it quite easily be the case that the quantity of matter was impermanent, right, that its quantity was not fixed, but our experience of matter is always an experience of change. Right? He says, this in a certain sense is what Hume demonstrated. Right? We must therefore presuppose a priori something that persists through change, right? In order to recognize that change as change. Right? This constitutes for Kant, as per the first analogy of experience, that, he writes, in all change of appearances, substance is permanent. Its quantum in nature is neither increased nor diminished. Right? So this is one of the principles that Kant outlines, then he says in the Prolegomena, he calls that a kind of physiological principle. But he says that this is a priori. He says that it's a priori because there's nothing in matter or the analysis of matter itself that would determine this form of permanence. Right? We nonetheless act within experience as if it is permanent. This is this notion of the as if coming in slightly earlier. It is to a certain extent a principle, right? A condition a priori of a form of experience, and here even of change, right? Okay. So, and we'll return to this particular principle, right, in detail later. Whereas Kant kind of relates it to the categories of relation, wherein substance and accidents are put in. I, within the critique of pure plasticity, relate it to quantity, since its principle is almost identical to what then comes to be outlined as the first law of thermodynamics, which I argue is actually purely quantitative, right, in kind, and it permits the reflective concept of identity to emerge. But we'll look at that a bit later. But just to say that this is this notion of matter being permanent is something which he says is cannot be derived from experience itself. Okay, so let's turn to plasticity now. We've maybe done enough of Kant. So we have wandered, which would be an A. We have wandered somewhat from the title of this seminar. It's perhaps best to get back on track. How then does the above epistemic structure, right, this architectonic that Kant is building, right, guide our own questions into pure plasticity? Firstly, we must ask what the conditions of plasticity are. Right, this is what I said right at the beginning. Which is to say, how is plasticity possible? Secondly, we must ask what the scope and validity of plasticity is, insofar as plasticity can be an object of experience. So let's unpack that slightly. Okay. So when we ask what the conditions of plasticity are, right, which is to offer a critique of brackets pure plasticity, right, we determine not only whether plasticity is and of itself causa sui, right, whether it causes itself, but whether plasticity is purely plastic. Right? So we're also asking. In other words, to ask what the conditions of plasticity are is to ask whether plasticity is itself brought into existence through plasticity. The capacity for plasticity, as also Malabou calls it. So whether the conditions, and this is the way I phrase it, whether the conditions of possibility for plasticity are themselves plastic. Right? So here we are in liminal proximity to our own problem, right, to our own question, maybe, to the opening of critique of pure plasticity. So let us interrogate the following hypothetical. If the conditions of possibility of plasticity were themselves plastic, then that would entail that no universal or necessary knowledge of its conditions could be determined. Right? Why? If we go back to the way that I was defining plasticity, and indeed the way that Malibu does, right? Into sense as transformation, it would be saying something like, the conditions. We'd be asking whether the conditions of possibility of transformation, right, are themselves transformable. So why then would that entail no universal necessary knowledge of its conditions, right? Precisely because those conditions would be subject to change, put quite simply. If the conditions of change are subject to change, right, there really are no conditions of it to a certain extent. Right? There are no necessary conditions of it. So, if the conditions of possibility of plasticity were themselves, I've said that. So, however, for Kant, transcendental conditions, right, conditions of possibility, must be by definition, be regarded as absolutely necessary, right? Absolutely necessary and universal. Much like if the conditions of possibility of experience were empirical, only contingent knowledge would therein be possible. Right? If the conditions of possibility of plasticity were plastic, only contingent knowledge of plasticity then also would be possible, using this analogy to the first critique. I mean, does that pose a problem? Right? Also, it's probably good to say here that when we're talking about necessary conditions here, the conditions of possibility of something, right? This is transcendental logic. It asks the origins of something, right? But it asks the origins of something insofar as it is possible for experience, right? We'll get to this in a bit, maybe at the end. It is not, therefore, metaphysical in a kind of traditional sense of the word, right? It's a reason also why it's not a kind of pure idealism, but we'll get there in a sense, through the weeks. It's also why, to a certain extent, why what Kant is doing is precisely critiquing metaphysics, right? In the first critique. So pure reason they're aligning to metaphysics insofar as something that is metaphysical, transcendent, right, would be possible for experience, which Kant says is impossible precisely because of the conditions of the possibility of experience. Right? God, immortality, freedom, right? The world. These would be things that partake of metaphysics or of pure plasticity that is not, or pure reason that is not conditioned or does not heed to its own conditions of possibility. Right? We'll get there maybe next week. Okay. So, is this a problem, right? That we would only get contingent knowledge of plasticity, since its own conditions, if they are plastic, would be they would change, right? They would be subject to transformation. Is it a problem? So, analogical to Kant's statement that experience teaches us that a thing is so and so, but not that it cannot be otherwise. Right? That experience has bounds and limits to it, has conditions, right? And that therefore experience cannot be otherwise, cannot be other than experience is, right? We might state that plasticity, right? So the experience of plasticity, things change, right? Teaches us that something is plastic, right? But not that it cannot be otherwise. So it doesn't tell us the parameters of plasticity itself, or the conditions of it. Right? All it says, right? So analogical to experience, is that we know that plasticity is possible. Right? We know that it's possible merely in the same way that we know that experience is possible, merely by the fact that things are empirically plastic, right? Which is to say that we have an experience of things that can transform. That it can transform. It is possible. Right? And here, even Kant would be would be in agreement. Right? We certainly have an experience of change, right? Of transformation. However, in the same way that experience, right, never confers on its judgments, true or strict, but only assumes comparative universality through induction, right? This is the Humean problem, right? If we are to determine what is necessary and universal in that which transforms, right? Which is to say, in other words, the conditions of transformation, the limits of transformation, or plasticity for experience, right? Which is to say, right, if we, as I said here, if we're to determine what the conditions and limits of plasticity are, then we must instead look to other sources than this simple experience of plasticity itself. Right? Plasticity cannot explain itself unless we fall into a continuum logic. Again, why does this matter? Right? Maybe there are no limits to transformation. Right? Maybe transformational plasticity is purely plastic. Right? Which is to say nothing but plastic. Right? Maybe transformation is or engulfs all things. Right? And here one might want to ask a comparable question to Hegel. It's not for nothing that Malibu's book is called The Future of Hegel, right? And we have this analogy between the dialectic and plasticity. I might want to ask of Hegel, is there anything that is not itself dialectical? Right? So, is all consumed in the dialectical logic? Is all consumed in a plastic logic? Is everything capable of transformation, even transformation itself? Is there change of change? Right? The transformation of transformation, of transformation, of transformation, which puts us into the absurd reduction, right? Or the problem of the third man. What footing would we have then? Okay, so as we have intimated at, right? I said this right at the very beginning. In the work of Malibu, plasticity is said to, I don't know if I used this right there when I was working on this today, but plasticity is said to constitute, this is very important, right? The irreversible capacity to give and receive form, as well as to deform. It's not reversible, right? If it were reversible, we would be in the domain of elasticity, right? I won't include this here, but or I might do at some point. But I recently done some work on the notion of elasticity in Hegel. Interesting enough, he talks about that a lot more than he talks about plasticity, particularly in his philosophy of nature, where he's actually also responding quite directly to Kant and Kant's metaphysical foundations to the natural sciences, where he's asking whether matter or force actually is a priori. One is before the other, or whether we derive the notion of matter from resistive forces, or as Kant calls them, attractive and repulsive forces, or whether matter can be predicated, but this is in Hegel, with elastic forces, which is understood by Hegel as the return to self. One would thinking that if one knows Hegel as well, might not be surprised that elasticity to a certain extent might be understood as privileged, only so far as dialectics has this return. Anyway, we're not doing Hegel, but okay. So irreversible, right? Not reversible. Capacity to give and receive form as well as to deform. So I said at the beginning, I've chosen to subsume, use that word, these capacities, give, receive, and deform under the single concept transformation, right? And I don't think that this is too daring of me to do that. In much of Malibu's work, we have this understanding of transformation as kind of being a way of understanding plasticity itself. And so I've chosen to use this notion of transformation, right, for the simple reason, right, and Malibu would completely agree here, that even to deform something, right, to deform, right, not just to give and receive, right, is to transform, right, is to change. So some quotes from Malibu here, not many, but so as Malibu writes, plasticity is the ability to receive form, right? So this she talks about this motor schema, right? That she wants to change the schema from writing plastically into plasticity itself, right? From out of deconstruction. So the ability to receive form as clay does, right? Or to give form as a sculptor does, right? But also to annihilate form, right? Explosions, right? And here we get plastic bombs and this idea, right? So that's from the very beginning of the future faith. So to annihilate or to deform is furthermore said to be the inherent capacity of what she calls in the New Wounded, Nouveau Blessé, and the Ontologie de l'accident, and the Ontologie d'accident, right? Destructive plasticity. So she writes, destructive plasticity is the destruction of form where no reformation follows. So where, she writes, the possibility of synthesis or reconstruction is no longer possible. Possibility of synthesis or reconstruction is no longer possible. Does this give us some indication, maybe, right, that the plasticity itself, or that which is plastic, is to a certain extent some form of synthesis, right? Some synthetic capacity. Right? Certainly, I mean, if we'll look at this and talk about this when we look at the schematism, right? We look at the notion of the imagination in Kant. Certainly, there, right, we have this notion of a kind of reconstruction, a forming, right? Of a Bildung, some form, right? So in this notion, this is key. So in this notion of destructive plasticity, right, there is a destruction of form where no reformation follows, right? The possibility of synthesis, right, reconstruction is no longer possible. What is thus paramount in her exploration of destructive plasticity is not only that the synthetic nature of plasticity is conferred to it, right? So if the synthetic nature is no longer possible in destructive plasticity, one would then assume that plasticity is then synthetic, right? Okay, possibly, the possibility of synthesis occurs in plasticity. Which gives us indication, right, that plasticity might have some form of synthetic conditions to it, right? Maybe even a priori, which is to say, in this respect, prior to plasticity itself. But that there is also said to be a form, right? We might even say mode of plasticity, prefer form of plasticity, where transformation reaches its limit. Right? So, indeed, if after destructive plasticity reformation is no longer possible, right, then it would appear, by Malibu's admission alone, that there is thus a form of plasticity that is itself not plastic, or potentially that there is an operation of a form of plasticity, right, that conditions the impossibility of the future plasticity itself. Destructive plasticity, right? Otherwise put, there is a form of transformation that is the condition of impossibility of transformation. Indeed, destructive plasticity is not the only indication, right? We have that plasticity is itself subject to some form of limit, right? That I argue derives from its synthetic conditions of possibility. The synthetic a priori, which is to say here, before plasticity, conditions of plasticity, right? So Malibu is very careful, and here Galloway picked this up, and I think it's very important here to take this into consideration. Right? Malibu is very careful to argue that plasticity, right, while irreversible, does not indicate infinite modifiability or polymorphism. So, what is plastic? That which is plastic is irreversible, right? Some form of transformation that occurs. It is irreversible, and in some cases we can have a point whereby no more transformation is possible. A limit to itself, right? Seems to have produced its own limit. And it's also not this infinite modifiability or polymorphism. It's infinite polymorphism, which in that, right, we're getting to what maybe some notion of pure plasticity is. That plasticity is it. This is the kind of conclusion here, which gives us now then some time to talk, right? So that plasticity is irreversible, right? That it is not infinitely modifiable, and that its synthetic conditions may also condition the impossibility of its own future. All point towards the necessity of uncovering the synthetic a priori conditions of its impossibility. If plasticity can, in fact, cease to be plastic, right? So if transformation can cease, right? Transformation can end, as these considerations imply, then pure plasticity is impossible. This means that there must be something in the transcendental structure of plasticity's conditions, right, that renders this impossibility necessary. Right? So there must be something in those conditions, right? Plasticity's conditions, right? That is not contingent. If it were contingent, right? If transformational plasticity was always subject to itself, was always subject to plasticity, then why would there be, right, a limit? Why would there be this limit to infinite modifiability, to infinite polymorphism? Why would plasticity itself, whether it's destructive or not, be a condition of its own impossibility? Right? There must be something in there, right, in these conditions to it. Otherwise, we would be in the realm of some form of metaphysical pure plasticity, where transformation is in and of itself capable only of transformation. The task then is to locate and articulate these conditions, right? To trace their synthetic configuration and thereby determine the structure of plasticity's necessary impossibility, right? And this is what the inquiry, this inquiry will constitute, right? The content of this course. So that's the end of that presentation. So my gambit is that these conditions can be found through a transduction of the categories via thermodynamics and information theory. And the key there, no, I'll stop talking a second. The key is that is why is infinite transformation impossible, right? The key there is that entropy, right, to a certain extent, and we'll pick this up later. Entropy offers us a principle very different from other principles that seems to bar that. We'll get that there next week when I'll talk about energy. Okay, so that's the end of the introduction. Hopefully, that was a good introduction both to Kant, to a certain extent, to what plasticity is, and to my own project. So, I think we've got half an hour. Is that right, Frida? Still?
We actually, yeah, half an hour.
Half an hour. That's right. No, it's 2 hours. I think that's yeah.
Yeah. I know it's 2 hours and a half, and we
Oh, it's
started.
2 hours and a half. Sorry,
Yeah.
I thought it was 2 hours. That's me. Sorry, might finish a bit early, but sorry about that. That's okay. I only prepared 2 hours because I thought anyway. So it's normally 2.5 hours. Is that correct?
2.5 hours. Yeah. Each session is 2.5 hours.
Okay. Good. But I suppose that will also give time for presentations maybe as well. So that's okay, which
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so maybe I'll first maybe ask some questions if anyone's got any questions, and then we can think about some other practical things maybe. But yeah, does anyone have any questions? Why don't we now that I've done that, why don't we introduce ourselves? Actually, I know this is always the thing that you do in the first thing, but introduce yourselves, and just so I can get an understanding also maybe of your own, how can I put this, your own relationship or your own knowledge, put it that way, of Kant maybe, and Malabou. Why maybe you were interested in the course, and yeah, so maybe we can start like that, and then that might produce a conversation. So I'm not too sure the best way of going about. I'm not sure if you're all in the same order as I am, but who would like to go first?
Yeah, maybe you can just call them out in the order you see them. It doesn't matter.
That's a very good idea, Frida. I'll do that because it's not always the same order, is it? But anyway, yeah, I'll do that.
That doesn't matter.
Yeah. Well, Frida, would you like to go first? I know that you're maybe you could also introduce your role as well, just in case there's yeah.
Yeah, well, hi, I'm Frida. I will be your moderator for this course. I did a bachelor in philosophy, and analytical philosophy, but then I study art and now I'm a painter, and that's basically what I do. And write me if you have any questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Frida. We go for Chengxiang Lin. Is that? Hi.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay. My name is Chanshan Lin, and I'm from China. I'm currently doing my PhD in the US, and I primarily work on energy humanities and media studies. That's why I'm here. Yeah.
Cool. Very interesting. My postdoc at the moment is particularly on energy, so that is something that will. Today I was going to do energy as this quantitative category, but I thought the introduction was better maybe. But so next week I'll try and do energy and entropy together. So good to know that there's someone else working on energy. So nice to meet you, Jing. Murillo, is it? Maria or Murillo Neto?
Is it me? Oh, okay.
Maybe I'm pronouncing your name wrong. Sorry.
Murillo. I also have a bachelor's degree in philosophy. My main interests are German idealism, mainly Hegel, and I recently took interest in information theory because I study both the analytical philosophy and the psychoanalytic traditions of Hegelian studies in the 21st century, and people like Zizek who use Jacques Lacan a lot to study Hegel, and I took interest in information theory because Lacan references Shannon and information a lot in the first seminar. So I went after Shannon's text to study and became very interested.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I'm not, as you could maybe tell, I'm not a Hegelian, but information theory will be a big part of what we do in this. So we'll be looking at Shannon and Weaver's book on that, and questioning kind of what is information. It's interesting, actually, as I was rereading the Kant this week, I'd not done this before. I kind of looked to see whether entropy wouldn't be there because it wasn't a term. Although it is kind of in Greek, and there's a really great book by Shannon Musset that shows this notion of entropy as a kind of notion of transformation in the Greeks. Energy is a kind of term, right, that does exist prior to its formalization in science in 1807 as a kind of rhetorical device, and she was much more connected to the notion of kind of rhetorics. But information, actually, strangely enough, is there. Obviously, it doesn't mean what it comes to mean later, but and I was reading the English, so I didn't look to go back to see the German. But yeah, Kant was using the notion information, and so that was very interesting to me. And certainly would need some time to go really read into it, and which maybe I should have done for this course. But yeah, it was very interesting to see that there. But we'll definitely be looking at Shannon and information theory as we go. So good to see that people are interested in both energy and information. Cool. I think it's Clara is the next person I see on the list.
Oh yes, hi. So I'm Clara. I have a background in artistic research, and the reason why I applied for this course is probably because I know Catherine Malabou and I've seen some of her lectures. I also know the concept of destructive plasticity. So this is very interesting also for my research. I guess that's like the main reason, and I'm looking forward to the course.
Brilliant. Thanks, Clara. Yeah, and as I wanted to, hopefully people kind of got that from the very beginning. Insofar as this is a critique, right, of plasticity, it's not criticism of Malabou's work. Catherine Malabou was one of my teachers at Kingston, so I have great respect for her work, and also great respect for her kind of in a similar way to the way that I like to work, really still also tackling the sciences as well, looking at the sciences and seeing what's going on there, the way that we can reformulate, some of our own philosophies in light of those, so, and as I said, yeah, this stuff, one of the kind of, how can I say this, the kind of impetus, as I saw at the end there, for looking at what maybe are these conditions of pure plasticity are the fact that Catherine herself seems to put limits on it. There are certain limiting notion, and destructive plasticity was the one I was most interested in, insofar as it seems to put this limit on some form of synthesis, but also its connection to entropy. So this is the thing that I also found, and I think I'll be picking up this a bit later. This irreversibility that entropy seems to hold in it, but also, I mean, this is no fault of Catherine's, but also why Catherine doesn't look into thermodynamics very much. She talks about entropy and only once, and that is in an essay on Freud, and it's in relation to Freud using the term entropy. But yeah, great. Thanks, Clara. So hopefully this will be interesting to you. So brilliant. Thanks. Next person I see is Marco.
Hi, I'm Marco. I'm from Belgrade, Serbia. My background is in architecture, and I'm doing my PhD studies here at the University of Belgrade. And the reason why I chose this seminar is because my doctoral research focuses actually on the concept of plasticity. I'm exploring, I'm doing a kind of critical historicization of the discourse of plasticity in modern architecture, and trying to understand how it was introduced from 19th century aesthetics primarily into architecture discourse, and how it actually affected the discipline in practice.
That's very interesting. I mean, the some of the prior work. I mean, the work I read on also plasticity outside maybe of is Herder's book on plasticity, which is like slightly earlier, I think, than well, obviously earlier than Catherine, but it's one of the other ones that she. But anyway, I'm just trying to think that it's very interesting though, the introduction of this notion. Yeah, were you going to say something, Marco?
Sorry, you said Herder.
Yeah, there's a book. Herder.
Yeah, it's called Plastic, but I think that just means sculpture in German.
Yeah, okay.
But the interesting, I don't know German, but the interesting thing is that there are two words for sculpture in German: plastic and sculpture, and they imply different method of modeling the material. One is like additive. Plastic is the plasticity. When you model clay or any other soft material, it includes adding material, unlike in the case of modeling marble or something which is something different.
Yeah. It's very interesting. You know, I was for those also interested in the work of Simondon. Also, some of the other stuff that's behind all of this is also Simondon's own work on the distinction between molding, modeling, and modulation. Which, for those that you know, did my other course or other courses on Simondon, especially by Malespina, you know, one of the things I suppose I was also kind of thinking behind this is that, as you were saying, you know, we have this either additive or we have this kind of subtractive notion of plasticity within kind of molding or modeling, and then also within modulation. But what's also very interesting within Simondon as well is that molding, modulation, and modeling are thought from the position of energy. They are, to a certain extent, thought from the position of thermodynamics and information as well, which was also another one of the other keys, I suppose, for me to think, okay, well, maybe there is some relationship here. Maybe we need to try and think about what these energetic and informatic conditions are of this form of molding or modeling or modulation, being this third one that Simondon talks about. I suppose also maybe very quickly here to explain, when I use this term Thermo-Informatic, so what I'm trying to do there is to try and put together thermodynamics and information theory. In a certain sense, is also to try and think about what the kind of energetic conditions are also for information, and to try and not materialize that which is often thought of as material, which is the same information, but also to think of its energetics as well. But yeah, great to have someone like you on the course who has got a very, you know, historical understanding of this notion of plasticity. So very cool. Thanks, Marco. Thank you. Yuval, nice to see you again. You were in my course, weren't you, last? Yes, yeah.
Hi, hello. Yeah, I was in your course. My my internet connection is not very stable, so I might freeze. But yeah, I followed the previous philosophy of thermodynamics seminar that you did. I did philosophy as a master's, and now I'm a prospective PhD candidate at the at the University of Amsterdam. And I work a lot with philosophy of technology, continental approaches to materialism in relation to war and warfare. And I work a lot with Deleuze, Simondon, and Gunther Anders. And I'm very interested in thermodynamics and how it's sort of like how it influences the classical philosophers that I'm very much interested in.
Yeah. It's good. It's good. I mean, as I said, you probably, having done that, I was saying at the beginning, having done that course, you're probably in a good place to take this, because I kind of wanted to structure on this a little bit more around my own thinking more than, because that one I did a little bit, but it was also an introduction to some of the sciences itself, which we will be doing. But I hesitated also about doing a kind of introduction or the philosophy of information theory as well, because it would have been quite nice to have done those two and then this. But I thought I'd jump straight into this. So yeah, cool. Nice to see you again, Yuval. The next person I see is Naomi. Is it McDonald?
Well, no, my name's Neve. How are you doing?
Neve, of course.
Yeah. No, that's okay. I am a student here at the Research Centre. I'm in the Critical Philosophy programme. I did a PhD on the diagram in Deleuze, but looking at Leibniz's art of combinations. So I'm really interested in synthesis, and I'm actually trying to kind of look at a kind of non-mirological summation in Leibniz. Well, that's very much kind of counter to a kind of more organicism, you know, and unity of parts and wholes, and you know, we would have in Kant. And just looking at how his Leibniz's symbolic logic informs formal logic, you know, going into set theory, And where this kind of question of extension of domain, you know, that you're kind of mentioning there is really, you know, interesting on the thermodynamic sort of physical level as well as the mathematical. And I looked at perception and force as well. So I was really interested in elasticity and ideas about recursivity. You know, that was very interesting that you mentioned that in relation to plasticity here, and ideas then about different dimensions of time, you know, where we might talk about, you're talking about irreversibility and plasticity, and then reversibility on the microphysical sort of level, you know, of the quantum. And it's just kind of occurring to me, I guess, actually, we're talking about irreversibility, it's very much about disappearance then, isn't it? You know, it's even like a Cartesian question, you know, about sort of the trying to sort of capture the intuition and the form of the intuition, you know, as it disappears. And I don't know, I'm just kind of seeing that sort of relationship there. Yeah.
No, that's very, it's very interesting that, as you say. I mean, yeah, the other course that I flirted with giving was on Michel Serres' book on Leibniz. So my other interest is also Leibniz. So and also the relationship and the tension between Kant and Leibniz around notions, particularly around notions of space and time as well. Where they emerge in either of them, and so yeah, it's good to know that there's someone interested in Leibniz also here. So yeah, that's and as I said, the aesthetic. It's a shame that I wouldn't be able to do that. I might hint at things in there, but it's a very interesting and probably difficult question. One of the things that you did pick up, though, which I think is very, very important, and we'll come to this, is this distinction between the macrophysical and the microphysical. And where can irreversibility or reversibility be predicated of one or the other? And I mean, quite quickly, one could say that why is statistical mechanics, which is the kind of second or the inheritor of thermodynamics, why is it not just statistical, but why is it a form of mechanics? It's a form of mechanics to a certain extent, and not just a kind of a dynamic. And we have this distinction, as Kant points out, precisely because it seems to function very similarly to the way that a kind of Newtonian reversibility would account for. And in that sense, it doesn't have time in the same way. And this was kind of the big introduction, if you will, of that notion of irreversibility that seemed to become this intuition of entropy, thought classically not through statistical mechanics, that it seemed to offer some form of intuition of the difference between past and the future, which we don't really get at that, well, not in the same way as we get in the microphysical. And because it's just a question of the distribution of velocities of particles, and distribution is statistical. It doesn't have that kind of harder notion of a distinction between past and future as we get in the kind of macrophysical. When we see the coffee cooling down and we never see it spontaneously heating up, right? There is some form of experience there or intuition that comes through maybe different principle than, and we don't really have access either. And I'll talk, let's say, to that microphysical. Hence why we have to use statistics to kind of get an average or get an idea of the way that's working. And the exact same thing could be said also then of the other great scientific revolution, quantum mechanics, that occurs in the 20th century, that also leans on probability, to try and to distinguish them or to try and figure out what's going on. So, yeah, nice to hear that, Yves. So, thanks.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. The next person I see is it Helena or Jelena?
Yerina.
Yerina.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm also a certificate student. I didn't know I was going to attend the class. I thought I was just gonna audition it or just sort of listen in, but I was able to join. I'm interested in philosophy of technology, and my background is a bit of a mixed bag. But so yeah, I'm looking forward to doing some of the readings. I haven't done any of the readings yet. So. Thank you.
That's all right. The readings are quite are quite sparse. So there is so I kind of thought that because a lot of these people will be in the critical philosophy program, that I would just set the main readings as going through the transcendental logic, so we can try and build up a good understanding maybe of Kant and what it means to be a critical philosopher, what critical philosophy is. But as you'll see on the syllabus, there are also added to that key scientific texts that relate to either energy, entropy, information, and informational entropy. The first set of the ones that it's a good chance for me to kind of go through there. The first set of those additional texts are kind of very brief introduction to the notion of what a quanta is. So, or what a quantum is, sorry. So what a discrete understanding of energy is, which we famously get in Planck, right? And then we kind of get in Einstein. And which was kind of key for me to trying to think energy through the quantitative category. So what does it mean? What did it mean for quantum mechanics to have to quantize energy? And what that basically means is that it's discrete and non-continuous. It's a little packet, right? And that packet has a constant to it, if we're thinking about photons at least, which is Planck's constant, or the reduced Planck's constant. What does it mean to do that, right? What does it mean to quantize something, to create a quantum unit of energy, which is slightly different actually from the stuff I was doing on thermodynamics in the course last time, because I didn't really think through that with that quantization, mostly because that doesn't happen until we get quantum mechanics. So where was I going with this? Some of them are more difficult than others, those readings. You're not expected to follow all of the maths, of course. This is not just for you, this is for everyone. You're not expected to necessarily intuitively understand how Einstein derives E equals mc squared in that paper in 1905, but also to look at maybe some of the language that Planck and Einstein used to talk about this discreteness of energy, or this quantum of energy. So that's kind of one of the reasons why they're there. The other ones are slightly easier. The second lot will, I think actually in the first one we've also got Clausius's terminology. So Clausius was one of the founders. He's the one that invents the notion of entropy in 1854, if I remember rightly. But he also has a very useful bit in some of his memoirs, which is called On Terminology. And that's in there. And that, in a way, gives us a notion of what energy might have meant for thermodynamics before it's quantized. It's a bit easier. There's a lot less maths in there. And then the entropy, we've got Clausius again. We've got Boltzmann. That Boltzmann text is also a lot easier than the Clausius one on entropy. But what is important about that entropy essay article, the 9th memoir from Clausius, not only is it there where he invents the term entropy, but he also relates it very importantly to what's called transformational content. So if we're building up a critique of plasticity or transformation, right, we might want to think, well, what is then this transformational content that Clausius is talking about, and why does he name it entropy? So then lastly, we have Shannon and Weaver's book on information, mathematical contributions to information. I think it's called, what's it called? I've got to always forget what that's called. But yeah, so there are ones which are slightly easier than others. Of course, this I'm also saying this maybe now for the presentations that people want to do. Presentations on Kant are absolutely fine. Presentations on the sciences maybe a bit more difficult, but take what you can from them. As I said, that you're not there to try and show me that you can also give me or understand the proof that Einstein makes of E equals mc squared. So, but that's all in there. So, okay, thank you, Reniful. Gave me an opportunity to talk about that as well. So, thanks. The next person I see is Joao. Is it Joao?
Hey Joe, my name is
Hi.
João. Okay?
Joao. Yep.
But it's okay. I am currently working on a research master's on Simondon and the problem of analogy. And I really like the possibility of thinking about Kant and its relation to contemporary sciences, right? And there's also something that really puzzled me with Simondon, which is that he constantly refers to Kant as a relativist, which I never really understood what he meant by it. And I hope to gain a deeper understanding of that also. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a very interesting question. I mean, you might have picked up on this, that the other, I've kind of been giving a key kind of history, I suppose, to my own development of this project. But the other key element and I think I said this in one introduction to it, is that Simondon does say in the last part of the individuation book, in the notion of the individual, which is the appendix, that a critique, I think he says, I have to get the right words, the critique of such like Kant would not be possible after thermodynamics and electromagnetism, since the very conditions of existence are also the very weft of existence itself. I think he says something like that. It's a very interesting, very, very interesting quote from Simondon. And as you're right, he constantly calls him a relativist. So yeah, I will be exploring this as well, precisely this. And you, for those who are also interested in Simondon, one can see that this notion of transduction I take from Simondon, which to a certain extent I kind of use as analogical reasoning, but it's not simply analogical reasoning. It's in Form and Substance, the third chapter of the individuation book, where he's talking a bit about transduction. He kind of says that it's not a comparison of identities, or it's a transduction is a comparison of equivalent operations or something like this. So it's not like you see the same thing in two things and say, okay, we can maybe analogically do this, but there is some form of information even. There's a relation between things that seems to be similar.
Identity of relations, I think he says. It's an identity of relations, I think he says.
That's it. Absolutely. Identity of relations. Absolutely. And so I should probably know that better if that's what the method I use. But yeah, thank you very much. But yeah, identity of relations. And so this is the method in a way that I try and use, right? And that is to say, try to see some form of identity of relations between maybe what's going on in these sciences, the Thermo-Informatic sciences, and in Kant's critique. And then try and produce this transduction of them, which he elsewhere says, that if we could take maybe the Kantian critique as kind of in a metastable state, right, which was to say, that it's ready or still has potential in it, maybe, right, so there's some potential in it for transformation, right, and this is also what Simondon would talk about as well, and I don't know if it is in that same chapter, but he also talks about how we can have these transductions or these transformations of these fields. Actually, also there's kind of another word that he talks about it through the addition of these of advancements in there. I think he talks about mathematics actually, and so in a way, this is kind of what I'm trying to do. So it is to try and introduce thermodynamics. Well, here we'll have a bit of quantum mechanics, but also information theory as a kind of a certain advancement in a certain domain. Look to see those relations, kind of the way that they work, and kind of drop that in as a germ into Kant. And it just so happens that it seemed to formulate this critique of transformation. So that's what it seemed to produce. So brilliant. Thanks for letting me talk about that. So brilliant. We might get there at the extra half an hour in a while, but Raphael.
Hello, I'm Raphael. I'm a musician. I study now singing in Basel, Switzerland, and I used to study composition before. And before that, analytic philosophy and musicology in Geneva. I had as a summer project 2 years ago to read the first critique, which took me more than a summer, but I've made it. So yeah, I'm just generally interested in Kant, in particular the transcendental logic. I would say, like I spent a lot of time on the deductions just to get what it was about, basically, and then also on this chapter of the schematism. And I guess this is where also I'm interested as a musician, where this question of, let's say, on one side the formal and on the other side the kind of logical or conceptual, like where they meet. And in a way, it's not really satisfactory in Kant, but I guess, I mean, also now I'm interested in like reading this like Peirce diagram alternative to this schematism and stuff like that. So general interest in Kant and yeah, of course, like I guess also having it in a new light and with other words and also out of my own kitchen will help me get more from it. So yeah, this is it.
Brilliant, great. It's really good to see that there's a great variety of people interested in different things. Actually, it's really good for people, you know, plasticity in and of itself, information theory, energy, Kant, Leibniz. It's really, you know, it's really good. So cool. Yeah. I mean, the first critique takes a while to get through. Yeah. I also, you know, I kind of want. How can I say this? Most courses, and unfortunately, this is the same for this course, do really concentrate on the analytic and don't go like headstrong into the dialectic, which is a shame because it is the larger part of the transcendental logic. But again, you know, we won't have time. 4 weeks is not enough time to go into all of the different parts. But you know, good that you spent some time with schematism, which is maybe the most, you're right, unsatisfactory insofar as there's that wonderful part in this community, you know, when he talks about the imagination and this kind of, what does he say, that famous phrase where it's like peering into it and the kind of the mysteries of the soul. So we'll remain hidden forever in the mysteries of the soul or something. Cool. Thanks. Nice to meet you, Raphael. So next person is Arnab, I think I see.
Hello, Joel. I think we met in the class on class on drug Derrida in the School of Materialist Research.
That's right. That was where I was talking about logomachy. Yeah, that's right. Yes, that's right, Anna. Yeah. The other project.
Yes.
Yeah.
It was amazing. It was a treat actually. And now I took this. So I'm Arnab, and I'm from Kolkata in India, and I have a background in literature, and I'm doing my second master's in continental philosophy and theology from the Global Center for Advanced Studies, and also like pursuing the transdisciplinary studies track, like at the New Center. So my interests are mostly in Western esotericism and how it finds how it finds allies in or like in philosophies of technology, of media ecology, and if we view all of this through the lens of immateriality and energy humanities. So I'm trying at this moment I took this course like other courses to understand better the relations and patterns between the various thinkers in continental philosophy. And I think being introduced to you and your work in like in the School of Materialist Research has given me a lot of things to think about. So thank you for doing this course here.
No worries, Arnab. Yeah. Nice to see you again. It's interesting. The question, I was talking a little bit about this earlier about theology as well, because this is this distinction between the general metaphysics or metaphysica generalis and special metaphysics, because of course one of the big things that Kant talks about is theology, right, in the dialectic. So and I, in a certain sense, you know, where the distinction between knowledge and belief as well, and I'll maybe pick up this at some point, but it's yeah, one of the things that I've tried to do with this also in terms of the dialectic is he talks about what's called the supreme intellect in the dialectic, the ideal of pure reason. And I've been trying to think about whether this kind of supreme intellect might be related to some extent to what's now called artificial superintelligence, some form of intelligence that is capable of what I call pure communication. So that is to say, to understand all relations, very similar to Laplace's demon. But anyway, yeah, nice to see you again, Arnab, and thank you for explaining your work. Thank you.
No, thank you, Joel.
Thank you. The next person I see is Armin, I think. Armin Abdul Malik, I think.
Yeah. Hey.
Hey.
Hope you guys doing well. Amazing presentation, by the way.
Thank you.
Name's Amin. I'm from Amin, actually. Tunisia. I have a background in game design and digital development. I am mostly interested in ludonarrative design and emergent structures of meaning production within digital environment. I'm a certificate student here. I'm taking on the history, design, and world making. I'm mostly researching the speculative framework for rethinking decentralization, post-human agency, accidental infrastructure, and how they shape ontological and epistemic conditions, counterculture, sovereignty within the digital spaces. So
very interesting. Yeah.
What initially drew me to this particular seminar, I'm currently researching mostly isomorphic design. So I really do look forward to say apply or extract some cybernetic insights per se from transduction or Thermo-Informatic transduction.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. You know, I was thinking today about because Malibu talks about this notion of a kind of motor schema, and she says that to a certain extent, the plasticity kind of replaces the schema of writing. She sees it in Derrida. And I was thinking about the schema, the kind of, actually I was thinking about the cybernetic schema, or the schema of what a system is actually in and of itself. And I was wondering whether that was what I was using or not. So I don't necessarily know if I have the answer to that one, but cybernetics, of course, is very much the heart of a lot of this. And I should have put that on there as well in terms of, I will do actually add this. If anyone wants to also give a presentation on the first part or some parts, I might put this in, of Wiener's work on control and communication, because there we also get to a certain extent a conflicting notion of what information is than what it is in Shannon. So and that is to a certain extent the whole of, not the whole, but very, very important for Malaspina's book, Cecile's book on the epistemology of noise. So I might add that in actually as well, because we do have those two important origins of information, if you will. I mean, Hartley, whatever, but we have Shannon and we have Wiener, of course. So cool. Thanks, Simon. Nice to meet you. We have next Arena.
Hello. My name is Arina. I have a master's degree in philosophy, and I'm a certificate student here. And I chose this seminar because of my general curiosity about main concepts that you put together. How I'm interested in how you will marry the theory of information and thermodynamics. It was quite interesting for me. Yeah,
Brilliant.
That's it.
Thank you, Irina. Thank you. Cheers. yeah, how will I marry those two? We'll see. Hopefully it works, or I'll convince you all that it works or something. But yeah. I mean, one of the insights into this was also to think about, you know, information as being necessarily related to energy and entropy, and one of the key figures in that is a guy called Rudolf Landauer, who there's something called the Landauer principle, whereby he which still holds, which says that any erasure of, so not just storing of a bit of information, but any erasure of a bit of information necessarily increases heat, or heat is generated through that erasure, which puts a kind of again a hard limit to what's called reversible computing, which is logically possible, but it's not actually possible to use Kantian distinction between logical possibility and actual possibility. Because of the increase of entropy. So you know, he's a kind of a little known figure, Landauer, but was writing just after Shannon, and very much also connected to the question of the Maxwell's demon as well. You know, to this notion of, can we, through information, through knowing about a system, reproduce the conditions for the continuation of that system? So if I know where the particles are, can I then, through the information of knowing where they are, sort them out again? And so this is really the connection. Maxwell's demon is the kind of the real connection that thinks thermodynamics and information together, information theory together. So yeah, thanks, Mary.
Yeah, thank you.
Sarush, haven't asked you yet. Some people have moved around on my thing, but that's okay.
Can you hear me?
I can, yep.
Yeah, sure. My name is Surush, and I have a PhD in philosophy, and I'm interested in posthumanism and speculative materialism. And by the way, it was a great class. Thank you.
Thank you, Surush. Cool. Yeah, we'll quickly respond to that. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if anyone anyone might have picked up on something that's going on here. In a certain sense, I'm also responding to the recent rise of speculative philosophies to a certain extent. So, kind of a try to reintroduce some form of critical philosophy. So, and yeah, I mean, I don't know whether this notion of correlation or this Kant as a relativist thinker kind of touches on that, but in a way, what will be happening in this course is to a certain extent a critique of a form of speculation, whatever that might mean, or we might come to see what that might mean. But yeah, so it's good to know that there's some other. There's a Hegelian as well, so some speculative thinkers here. Nice to meet you, Suresh. Thank you. Okay, Diego.
Hello, Joe. I am Diego. I am from Bogota. I have a background in sociology and philosophy. I followed your last year seminar on philosophy of thermodynamics.
That's right. Yep.
And I think that my interest is related with probably speculative materialism and Marxism. My approach to Kant is like through the French philosophy critique, especially through Foucault and Gilles Deleuze. And I think that I am very interested in the way in which the information theory could be used to understand social change in general. I took the Cécile Malespina seminar about Simondon imagination and invention. And I think that somehow I would like to relate this notion of imagination, the theory of information, and the way in which we can think how the social formations of the modes of production change or coexist in terms of the less. It's very like a wide interest. It's not a specific one, but yeah, this is my interest.
No, it's a very interesting that as well. I mean, the well, as you because yeah, you took the course, so I've touched on some Marxist readings of thermodynamics in that, Bellamy, Foster, and other people. One of the I suppose also the other driving force behind this critique is also to try and understand the extent. Let me put it this other way. Capitalism, to a certain extent, presupposes a notion of perpetual growth, or perpetual growth is something that seems to be often goes side to side, maybe synthetically with capitalism. And what I, in a certain sense, I'm trying to also offer here is what could be understood as a critique of also pure productivity or pure efficiency. And in that way, it's tried to say that, in a certain sense, and Malibu actually talks about this, that there is a kind of dream of capitalism for a pure form of plasticity, right? An infinite changeability, an infinite choice, which is no choice in capitalism, but an infinite production of commodities, right? That capitalism dreams of itself being infinitely transformable. And Malibu is very clear on this, that her notion of plasticity doesn't want to do that, right? And so there definitely is, within those limits that I think that she also puts in, and that I'm trying to think, also a critique to this notion of perpetual growth, right? Which, in a certain sense, is a way of me trying to critique a form of capitalism, a form of infinite transformability that capitalism seems to function as, or even capitalism as the motor of transformation itself, which often takes itself to be. So yeah, great, very thanks, Diego. People have moved around a bit, so I'm not sure that we're almost there. I think I know that Yazan is not possible for his or their audio, so they've written their background up on there. So thank you very much for that, Yazan. Yeah, great opportunity to read and reread Kant, as it always is. I think maybe the last two is Ranga and Yanesha, I think. So Ranga, and then we'll finish for today after we've spoken to Yasha. Is Ranga there? If not, we will maybe pass to Yansha. Is it Yansha Uma?
Am I audible?
Yes.
Hi, the name is Janshir.
Yansh. Okay.
So I have a master's in arts and aesthetics, which is an integrated program in visual studies, theater and performance studies, and cinema studies. Till a week back, I was a PhD student, but I dropped out from my PhD, and I was working on slow cinema and Salazian naturalism within the lens of neo-rationalism. And before my master's, I have a bachelor's in engineering, which is mainly mechanical engineering. So yeah, from an engineering application level, I've done on thermodynamics and stuff like that. So yeah. I'm interested in my research mainly focuses on epistemological concerns, kind of at the crossroads of critical philosophy, technology, and so on.
Brilliant. Yeah, interesting background. My technical knowledge of thermodynamics comes from mechanical engineering as well. So I did a course in mechanical engineering via Bombay University, actually. So that's where also my understanding of it comes from. I didn't do it in physics because I mean, although it's incredibly important still, in mechanical engineering, thermodynamics is still slightly more important than, say, quantum mechanics and other things. So, particularly on the course that I did. So yeah, mechanical engineering was the way that I learned it. So great. Okay, the last person is Ranga, but if they're not there, they might have popped to the toilet or not, but who knows. Maybe we can finish up now. I don't think there's anyone else who I think you all moved around, but I don't think there's anyone else. there will be presentations to be given, and Frida, will you liaise with them? Will they email through to you to do that? Will they?
Yeah, I will send the spreadsheets through the drive so people can sign themselves in. And if you can just tell me which text do you want people to present in, or I can put them all. I mean, it depends. It's up to you. And then people can just put their names.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, absolutely. What I'll do is I'll do that. I'll fill that out. I'll fill that out with the possible different texts that they can do. And as I said, I'll add Vina in. And if there's, I don't think there's anything else that I want to need, but Vina, I think, would be a good one to add in. If anyone also knows cybernetics, they might want to present on that. So I'll do that tomorrow, Frida, and then people can put their names there.
Sure.
And I'll also upload tomorrow all of those that can quite easily be found on the internet, those texts like Einstein, Planck, etc. But I'll try and extract them from PDFs or put them as PDFs, so then they're all there. I'll do that tomorrow as well. Okay, everyone. Well, thank you very much for tuning in, as I say, and I'll see everyone next week.
Thank you.
Thank you. Cheers.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone.
So thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Joel. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.